Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Better Than Before podcast. This is Dr. Jake Aleck, owner of Aleck Pain to Performance. And today is going to be our first solo cast. So when it comes to the Better Than Before podcast, well, why is it a thing? Why did I create it? In the end, it's a local community podcast where I bring in other professionals, other coaches, teachers, people within the community to talk about their life, their work, their family, anything that just brings back to Frankfort, Mokina, the south suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, and just hear them talk about their story. But on the back end, I'm going to do a handful of these solo casts just to provide value to you as the listener or viewer on all things health. And today, I'm going to talk nothing but about nutrition. And nutrition is something that I cover with all of my patients, clients, people I talk to in the community, whether they don't come and see me as a patient. But in all things, as a human being, we have to have more knowledge about nutrition to make good decisions, or at least understand the bad decision that we may be having when we are eating something. And I want to take advantage of today as part one of a 4-part series about nutrition, just for you to understand where I start with everybody when it comes into coaching or leading them through the path of learning more about nutrition. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get going. And when it comes into nutrition, there's one starting point that everyone needs to understand from the beginning, is that there are foods that when we consume them, they help our body, and then there are foods that hurt our body. So when we remember what food is nutrition. And nutrition gives our body value to thrive, as in do its thing that it's supposed to do, which the human body is an amazing piece of chemistry, because we're essentially having thousands of cells within us that are just operating on the daily for us to live, right? But then there's also foods on the back end that don't help us, right? If we consume them, our body actually has to work harder in order to process them and kind of rid them from our body, because they're not giving us any nutritional value. So that's just the starting point. Or what are the foods that help us, and what are the foods that are hurting us, right? Well, phrased a different way, there are foods that help us, which are anti-inflammatory. And then there are foods that hurt us that are pro-inflammatory. And inflammation is just the state of the body having to work harder to get it back to its normal being, right? So if you sprain your right ankle or you have surgery on your shoulder, your body's in a current inflamed state, right? Because there's something going on there that shouldn't be there, right? So when we have these experiences, our body wants to do everything it can to get it back to normal, right? Get it back to an anti-inflammatory state. And it's the same thing for all things joint pain, right? If I have low back pain, knee pain, neck pain, our pain is a current inflammatory state where our body is telling you something isn't going right. So when it comes to the grand spectrum of food, there is food that we eat, or things that we eat, because there's certain things I wouldn't even consider food, that put us in that inflamed state, that pro-inflammatory state. But then there's also food that rids us of that pro-inflammatory state, where it makes us better. It helps us. So let's go ahead and just dive into what those categories of foods are, because when it comes into nutrition, we always want to have nutrition or dietary habits that are flexible, right? No one thrives off of dietary choices that are very structured, as in the morning you have to eat this, or lunch you have to eat this, and dinner you have to eat this. You can't live your life from age 25 until 70 being that structured. It's just not sustainable unless you're a high-end athlete and you're following an eating plan for, say, a year, 2 years to thrive in your sport. But when it comes into living life, we have to have flexibility. We have to have food choices that you can say, oh, when I'm at home, I can eat this. When I'm at a restaurant, I should eat this. If I'm eating out in the airport, I should eat this, right? So when it comes into a good nutrition plan / dietary habits, we want to have flexibility. We don't want to have rigidity. And when it comes into eating foods that are anti-inflammatory, we can be super flexible that way. And when it comes to staying away from foods that hurt us, we can be super flexible that way, because there are a lot of foods out there that provide our body with value. There are a lot of helping foods. But on the back end, I want us to understand what are the hurting foods, what are the foods that may be putting my body into a pro-inflammatory state or hurting me. And that's always where I start with patients, is what are the foods that maybe we should be staying away from. So what I want to dive into first is what is currently making up the standard American diet. And the standard American diet is just what all the researchers and people that put papers into literature have found that most of the Americans eat on a daily basis. And no pun intended here, the standard American diet, SAD, is short for SAD, because it really is sad. What people are eating on a normal basis in America is just not great. And we know that it may not be great too, because we know obesity is on the rise, chronic diseases are on the rise, and joint pain and low back pain is on the rise as well. So all of those can blend between each other when talking about this. So let's just dive into that right away. Right now, the standard American diet is composed of let's group this into 8 things, okay? The first is refined sugars. So the standard American diet, roughly 20% of the total calories that people eat is in refined sugars. And to describe refined sugars, though it's table sugar, high fructose corn syrup, or any sort of syrups that people put on foods, I just call them liquid sugars, right? So that is 20% of the current standard American diet. The next 20% of the diet are refined grains. So these are anything that's made out of flour, cereals, breads, cakes, cookies, donuts. Think of like your desserty foods. That's what 20% of the calories that makes up the standard American diet is in that stuff. The third part is seed oils, or oils that are high in omega-6 fats, for my people on the back end that may know what that is. So seed oils are like corn oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, peanut oil. These are all oils that are used to fry foods, or these are oils that are typically found in packaged foods at the grocery store, or packaged foods anywhere, because it keeps the shelf life of these foods longer. So again, that's another 20% of the diet. So between refined sugar, refined grains, and seed oils, that makes up 60% of the current standard American diet. And I'll already tell you right now, those are foods that are pro-inflammatory. Those are hurting foods, okay? But I want to go ahead and finish through on what makes up the rest of the standard American diet. And 20% of that is meat and eggs, so protein-based foods. That's what makes up 20% of the diet. Dairy makes up 10%. Vegetables make up 10%. And alcohol, roughly 1%. And again, this is all variable, but in its grand scheme of things, that's the percentages of calories that makes up the standard American diet. And what I started with earlier was we know that 60% of the calories of the standard American diet are pro-inflammatory foods. Those are hurting foods. So this is how we can make sense of, why is low back pain on the rise? Yes, we're sitting more than ever, but if we're eating more junk more than ever, that can have a hand with it too. Why is obesity on the rise? Well, we're eating hurting foods that allow us to not feel great, maybe allow us not to feel like we have the energy to exercise. Well, now exercise may go down while we continue to eat this junky type of food. So when it comes on to what are the foods that we should just avoid, let's just start there. That's 60% of the standard American diet that we want to stick away from. And those are refined sugars, refined grains, and those seed oils. So if we can just pause and say, let's just take out any sort of food, whether it's those cereals, whether it's those oils that you're having in fried foods, whether it's the the table sugar or those liquid syrups that you put on your waffles or any sort of foods like that, right? If we can just take those choices and replace them with anti-inflammatory foods, which, let's just start here, fruits and vegetables, anti-inflammatory. So that's where I start with a host of my clients and patients, is to say, hey, these are the foods that we need to stay away from. Refined sugar, refined grains, and oils that are seed-based, right? Avocado oil, olive oil, coconut oil, those are a whole different story. Those aren't these refined seed oils, okay? But if we were just to take out those 60% of our calories that are in the standard American diet and replace them with fruits and vegetables, which are anti-inflammatory, or foods that help us, we are going to do ourselves a whole lot of value, like a crazy amount of value, right? Because if we just pause and take out all of those foods that are pro-inflammatory, or just do our due diligence to say, hey, let's eat a little less of those and replace them with anti-inflammatory foods like fruits and vegetables, now we can actually eat more food because fruits and vegetables have fiber in them, they're lower in calories, and there's a lot of water that makes them up. So it feels like we're eating way more, but in the end, we're eating less calories. And if we have a diet that's mostly composed of anti-inflammatory foods, you can actually eat a whole lot of food and feel super full by the end of the day, but your calories are pretty low because, again, a lot of the food is made up of water, fiber, and just good nutrients that give our brain a sense of, oh my gosh, we're doing really good here, and we're going to give you that sense of fullness. So that's the biggest thing that I want you guys to understand and start with, is that hey, there's these large amount of food groups that we're eating a lot of as the human race in America, which are those refined sugars, refined grains, and seed oils. And let's just start with stripping those, or doing our best to say, hey, let's take those out of our food groups and let's replace those with maybe some extra vegetables and extra fruits. And if you do that, you're going to be giving yourself a huge head start in this game of eating more helpers than hurters, okay? And I always like to end this with some real life examples. And if you're at a restaurant and you order you're looking to order some food, right? And we always want to start with some sort of maybe good protein, so a good fish or a good piece of meat, and just ask for double vegetables paired with that, right? Or if you're out for lunch and you want to say, hey, I want to have some food that's anti-inflammatory, order yourself a big old salad and have some protein on top, right? Because a lot of times when we have foods that are really sweet or sugary, or if we're having foods that are really bready in nature, those are the foods that composed of those refined sugars and refined grains. And then on the back end, if we have nothing but food that is in packaged goods, now those are the goods that have most of those seed oils in them to keep them fresh while they're on their shelf life. So let's just start there with this first solo cast and just understand that there are foods that we should be eating, anti-inflammatory, and there are foods that we shouldn't be eating that are pro-inflammatory. So foods that are good for us, are helpers, are anti-inflammatory. Foods that are hurters are pro-inflammatory. What are the foods that are hurters? Sugars, grains, seed oils. What are our foods that are helpers? Fruits, vegetables, 100%. We'll get into all the other things that are anti-inflammatory. That's going to be my next podcast, what is the things that make up the best anti-inflammatory diet. That'll be next. But I want you to understand, if you look at a plate of food in front of you, am I eating this and this food is going to help me, or is it going to hurt me? And if it's consumed with mostly of the food that I just talked about, that are the grains, the oils, and the sugars, that's most of the hurter. And we just want to do a little bit less of that. And if we can replace the hurters with the helpers, vegetables and fruits, you're doing yourself a really, really, really good job there. So let me know if you have any questions. I'm very active on social media when it comes into Instagram and Facebook with the clinic or myself. But on the back end, I'm doing way more posting of my personal nutrition on my Instagram, and my Instagram handle is drjake.aleck or drjake.aleck. And every night I'm going to be posting pictures of my entire day's worth of eating. And it's going to give you guys an aspect of, oh, well, he's eating a lot of food, but maybe it's in that anti-inflammatory foods, right? Because you can eat a lot, and if it's anti-inflammatory, the calories are going to be nice and crisp, and you're not going to be overeating, but you're going to feel really darn full at the end of the day. So give that a view if you're looking into some examples, but continue listening, and it should be in 2 weeks after this one. I'll be going into the whole podcast on an episode that's just anti-inflammatory foods and foods that you can eat a whole bunch of and still be doing a really good job when it comes to your dietary habits. So have a great rest of the week. Happy Friday, and I'll keep you posted, and look out for our next week's guest, as it's another local native to the town of Frankfort. And again, this is the podcast that allows you guys to listen, and hopefully by the end of it, you've learned something or learned from someone that makes this town or you better than before. Thanks.